Good afternoon. I am Anto Buriajo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something we do every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern to talk about what's next for smart buildings. A list of panelists are on mondaylive.org. Just as a reminder that views expressed on the show are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post comments and questions on the Zoom tools. It's already started, I can see.
I'd say, did you see the post that Chad did?
Yeah. And please do complete the survey at the end. And also this deck is on mondaylive.org. So our topic of this month of January is the future of workforce, smart buildings, and this is our agenda for today. Have a chit chat about what's going on, and then we want to talk about how to make smart buildings attractive so that people want to be in it, meaning people want to be in the smart buildings industry. So that should be an interesting subject. A few slides that some of us have put up. John put up something from JLL that we'll no doubt talk about. Anna Scholten, no clue what this is. I'm sure he will explain.
It's a vivarium.
It's got to be his frog story.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a
All right.
vivarium.
I thought he was starting to grow his own food so he didn't have to go to the grocery store.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that. Roger's talking about the building buzz cycle. I'm sure we'll come back to this subject. Ken talking about Together Apart, which is his theme for next month. I was just sort of digging around about sort of where future jobs are and came across this article, list 30 high-paying jobs. Obviously, there wasn't an item that says smart buildings. There's some close, but I thought this was an interesting article in this discussion. So with that, I bring it back to the group. Where should we start? John, do you want to start in your JLL?
Yeah, always looking for input, especially out of the CRE industry and the major players there. And this is just an example. They put together a report, a white paper, if you will, on their findings with their customers' contacts, et cetera. And, I think the overall theme is come back. That people want to come back, but they want to come back in different ways. They're going to have different expectations about the space, about how they can collaborate, about those types of things. I wouldn't say real lengthy, but I mean, it's more than a two-page document. We're taking a look at as we all try to figure out, what is after, right? We talk about the new normal, but people still need buildings. People are going to go to buildings, but how different will they be? And what are the people asking for? And of course, with the larger corporations, we see there's a high degree of sensitivity by the employer of what do people want, because they need to recruit and retain good employees. So
interesting. Okay, Anno, tell us about what is it called?
Well, it's more to do with the subject at hand today about how do we get younger generation interested in our space. And so this is an example. This is actually my youngest son, who actually works for me. He's a software guy. He actually does software UX development. But this is what's called a vivarium, right? Which is the environment for a frog or reptiles. So that's Dumpy the frog in the vivarium. And so, just as an exercise, he built a complete environmental experience for Dumpy, including, misting, water, light, heat, temperature, humidity. I think he's moving it to even to feeding exercise. So, but the real point of it is, the stuff that you can do today, and he did all this with less than $100 worth of kit, from a Raspberry Pi, free Amazon Web Services, so he's got free cloud capabilities. He's got, he bought hardware from Alibaba and Amazon online, like temperature sensors and pumps and stuff. you know, and to build a complete controllable environment, you know, it was, and then of course, all the data that was collected, he collects a whole bunch of data on Dumpy the Frog as well. But to build all that environment was, you know, was a fun exercise. But the real point was that you can do that these days, you know, to get people interested in what we do with controls and what we do with the bigger environment of commercial building is, you know, is really easy to get them interested and excited to do that. Yeah, compared to when all us grandfathers were doing it in our time, you know, we had to buy an expensive Honeywell Johnson's controller. The equipment wasn't cheap. To just experiment and play in the space, you know, is easy now. And we should be encouraging that. If you want them to get excited, I mean, I don't want to, the last thing I want to do is to put a Honeywell VAV in front of my son and go, here, program this and look how fun it is. But what you can do with the IoT devices and Raspberry Pis and free cloud software and stuff. And then, you know, the parallel I drew was, if you remember, for all of us who went through that phase, you know, PCs really kind of came into the mainstream when the hackers started building their own, right? When hackers could get on equipment and start building their own PCs, and then it really took off. And it's the same thing in this space, you know, what IoT technologies. Oh, and then the last piece, by the way, he just bought a 3D printer because he's actually building a new case for the actual electronics so that he can, you know, make it look neater and tighter and tidier and all that sort of stuff. So he bought a 3D printer. So now you're into how do you package it? How do you, you know, how do you put it into a deployment and make it waterproof, et cetera, et cetera. So talking about how to get kids involved, this is a really good way of doing that. Encourage them to play in the IoT space, and then, you know, you just expand that mold to what we do.
I very much agree with that. Well, that's great, and that's a great lead in, because what I'm looking at for our February theme is the your new vocation together apart, and that's the common theme that these guys are used to, kind of putting projects together, all working from all their little places in the world, and that's the way they think. And my pull quote is finding your new vocation with innovation, motivation, location, and education. I think that's the way we spin our industry, because we actually have the ability to have a lot of our work done locally offsite, and basically they can get involved in that. I think there's also another strong theme is everybody wants to understand the bigger environment situation, even beyond the building, and that tends to bring them in as well. Some other things I've noticed is actually Schneider Electric has started this technical degree apprentice digital energy program. And they're basically hiring people, throwing them into this apprentice program. So I think we should take a little bit more look at what the Europeans are doing. I think they're a bit ahead of us in recognizing how we're going to have to bring people into the industry. The other one that I'm looking forward to is in our March issue, we're going to celebrate the women in our industry. And I'm going to reach out to all of them and have them explain how they got into the industry and why young girls today should follow them into the industry. I think that's a big part. Another thing that is just warming my heart is in my LinkedIn group, I'm getting a tremendous amount of these apprentices joining and following automated buildings. They see some kind of a connection there, which I think is useful. The other thing that really excites me is probably 20, maybe even as high as 30% of them are young women, which we've always struggled to get into our industry. And young women, extremely well educated. The other thing that's happening is this whole repurposing piece is kind of interesting too, is if you take a look at their backgrounds are not necessarily electrical or mechanical. They come from almost anything, psychology, chemistry. They basically, all they've got is a real good education. Now they've got a good education, now they need a real job. And if somebody will actually give them a job and bring them on as an apprentice and actually give them a certification after a year, I think that's a powerful program.
Great. Thanks, Ken. talking about Europeans, Roger, well, you're not really European anymore.
You're not European anymore. Yeah, no, what I did was drop there, something Nicholas Verne did, which came out of Ken's automated buildings side, was that he's taken on, so Gartner did a study of all the hype things like the, digital twins and virtual reality, but everything related to our industry. Nicholas moved in sort of 2020 and tried to actually, sit it on the curve somewhere where it might have progressed 18 months longer. And it's more of an open question, I guess, because you'd have to go on to, because of the detail, look at it yourselves. But it's whether we really have progressed that much, and where it does sit on the curve is quite interesting, because most of it is still, where will it sit? Who's going to be offering it? Digital twins and certainly the AI and analytics and things, and where do they get deployed? I think it's important to have a look at that. And it kind of brings me back a little bit to something Anno said, which is a little bit worrying to some extent, was he said he didn't want to sit him in front of a Honeywell VAV, but I guess it's which part of the industry do we want to bring people in to make them attractive? Because they're all attracted to the software side and all those, the virtual reality bits and AI and stuff. But I guess you're going to have to also attract people into the mechanical side. So it's kind of just throwing it out there, though, to have a look and think, do we really think that's where it all sits on the curve? Most of it is still on the hype area at the moment.
Just to that point, sorry, quickly, Roger, one of the interesting things my son said was, and again, he's a software guy, and the thing that he really loved by doing the project was he was able to put his hands on things like valves and actuators and relays and stuff and make it real. And the IoT, and I guess my point about the VAV thing was that his little project allowed him to better understand how his software impacts real stuff, right? Real hardware, real equipment and stuff, and motors and actuators. I don't think you can do that by having him do an interface to a VAV controller, right? Without having to build out the whole infrastructure and stuff. And so it was just a quicker path to the same end result.
So Anno, I'm kind of curious. Think about, because what you said is pretty interesting. It's a great story, but you said, let's get our kids involved in tech. I'm going to suggest they're going to do that almost naturally. So my question is the building automation industry opening up such that kids can see a connection between their consumer goods and what's happening inside the building? Is it somehow opening up where they're starting to connect dots with this cool consumer tech and what's happening inside the building? Is that even close?
I think the take I got was that they can draw the parallel now, right? They can draw they can connect the dots, whether they go there all the way, but they can actually connect the dots. In our, at least in my day, I had to go off. I did an engineering degree and had a controls major, and and all that sort of stuff to do the heavy lifting, and then connected the dots because I was in controls. But to your point, by getting involved in all this, cheap, free, easy stuff. And by the way, the other part of that slide is the tools, right? The tools are just phenomenal. Simple things like YouTube and GitHub and support sites. There's just a huge plethora of software development and hardware support tools that, if you have a question about anything today, you could go on the web and find an answer to. So I think my point is, yes, I think by doing it this way, you can connect the dots, right? You can say, okay, I see this and I can see how it applies here, and then I can take the 2 steps to a VAV controller.
Right.
I want to throw this in, and I think we look at things narrowly, and we need to open them up a little bit. So it's great that we have to get the younger crowd involved. There's no question about it. Good example, Anno, absolutely. But again, I think where we are shorting ourselves is, and I brought this up before, and I guess I'm just passionate about it now. Let's just say it doesn't have to be just the younger generation, the mid generation, a little bit older. there are tons and tons and tons of people unemployed. Their jobs are not coming back. They are looking for something new. And again, with the amount of opportunities in this space, not just techs, not just developers, there's lots of others. This is a market that I think we need to reach out and show how exciting of a market and how many really good opportunities there are. So I guess the bottom line is, let's not forget people who are not in that younger age.
I think if I take a look at the young folks that took over my old energy automation consulting company, and the diversity of their background totally amazes me. And they're most of an engineering background, but some of them are data scientists. Some of them are have come from completely different environmental movements and all kinds of things. And that diversity has really changed the direction of the company, and has also created a few spin-offs of startups, folks wanting to create data scientist type approaches, and basically to start spinning off energy auditing as a service and some of that stuff. So there's been some interesting crossovers. And if I kind of look at it, when it first started, it was like, why, we're kind of got this mindset that you'd only hire an engineer. Your big decision is, do you hire a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer? And I think the answer is probably neither one of them. Probably the data scientist or somebody that can, the data is becoming, the whole thing, and the data becomes the way we learn. I liked Anno's analogy there. Is that's how he learned about valves and stuff, was basically he started coming at it, and now I need to physically do something. How do I physically do something? Well, I do that with a valve. Oh, that's why these guys are so excited about it. Like we're kind of all been involved in the working end of it. We really need to move some of our thought into the thinking end of it.
Hey, can I make a comment on that ties together a few things? As we were preparing for this, and we said, how do we make it interesting to people? I was thinking, we think it's interesting, and we've got quite a diversity of people. What are some of the barriers to making it? And to Bill's comment, I think it is open. And as we've done our research and found all these different educational programs available, it's open. I think the problem is it's opaque to people. You can't easily show someone, here's what you need to know to be involved in smart buildings. It's so many different things, and let's not even say any of them are hard to learn, right? But there's so many of them that it's not a clear picture. If I want to get a job as a software engineer, there's a clear picture. You go learn XYZ language, somebody wants to hire you, and you learn I'm a database guy or UI guy. But what we do, it's just so opaque. How do they see through that fog to, what do I need to know that would get me a job that would look like what, And I don't have an answer for that, but that's what I was thinking in preparing for this. Is it's really hard to see.
I think one part of the problem is I don't think we well understand all the jobs that are out there on the table now that are going to interface with our industry. Certainly the AI side of it, certainly just a whole bunch of directions that we're now going. The data scientist approach to our industry is I think, something that we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about.
So building on that, John, yes, we're opaque, or the industry is opaque, but I think what makes it worse is that the subject of our attention, as it were, buildings, is something that people don't think about. It's almost like transparent, right? So you have this opaqueness of what happens, and this transparency of what the result of it is.
Yeah, the result is you walk into a building and you're happy, and you don't give it any thought, and you go about your day, and the building runs well, and the owner has a good image of sustainability because everything's done right, and I got other things to do. So yeah, it's opaque and transparent at the same time. It's hard for people to, I think, grasp. And we talk about some of the programs and the whole list we assembled in the last 3 weeks. Pick one of those And on its own, does it generate this excitement, interest? You know, maybe, hey, take this and you'll get a job. That's one thing, but that's not what we said we're trying to encourage. We're trying to show this is an exciting, dynamic place to be. But you pick any one of those topics on that list, and yeah, I think you'd be stretching it to say it looked exciting on its own. Right?
But that's kind of, John, that's kind of why I was interested in like I said, in my son's project, in that, to your right, because the problem is just a too big a problem statement to digest. But when you shrink it down to a frog's vivarium and you go, here are all the things that are important and interesting to a frog to make it live, because the frog doesn't know you've done all this magic, right? It's nice and happy and it continues to live. But that's the beauty of what I like is, you know, in some kind of study I was talking to my son about, it goes, you know, maybe this should be building a vivarium control system might be a really interesting project for an engineering student, right? Because that kind of gets you gets you all the bits, the controls, the actuators, the hardware, the software, the cloud, analytics. It kind of puts it all into it. And then to go, okay, to Bill's point, connecting that dot to, okay, now let's take that to the bigger problem of a building, which has got thousands of these vivariums in it.
Okay, so I completely agree. It made it relevant and manageable. It's kind of like what Dean Kamen and First did with the robotic stuff, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get you involved and you're going to learn all this stuff just because you want to have a robot that goes crashing into other robots or does some, you know, function and wins a competition with other robots, right? That is something somebody can get their head around. So I like the vivarium idea, but boy, come up with other ideas that we can try to get people excited about that contain the things we do for buildings. It's, I don't know. I find
Here's a thought, guys. We need smart building TV.
There you go.
We need smart building TV with multiple channels. We also need some personalities. We need the equivalent of a comedian who can tell stories on a particular channel that people would actually want to go listen to for an hour or at least 30 minutes. But Mark, John, you know, Anto, you all have different, what I would call channels on the TV that people might want to subscribe to for a particular, you know, focus or slant of this overall picture. But we don't have any way to deliver that in a collection. But if people could go to one place, Smart Building TV, and they had a choice of, you know, 15 different channels of stuff, and depending on what you're interested in, they watch it. It's a funding issue, right? But there's a lot of ways that stuff gets funded nowadays. It could be through advertising, it could be through sponsorship, it could be through you know, subscriptions, any and all of the above, right? So, and I think it would be, and you could have young people with their channels, you could have older people with their channels. Just a thought, because we don't have any one place to go. We depend so much on the OEMs to drive knowledge. But who the hell really wants to go to Honeywell? Putting my personal feelings aside here for a second.
No offense.
That's a great suggestion. That's a really great suggestion. That's how a lot of kids get into different things. They just start watching a channel on YouTube, right?
Right.
Yeah, a YouTube channel. And it's so, you know, buildings are, it's almost like, it's like electricity and the electrical infrastructure. That's cool, but it's just ubiquitous and opaque. And you can name more and more that are just assumed in this world. So then how the heck, Chad has a good point that he mentions, you tie each building, each BAS system, building automation system, with saving the world, energy savings and all that. That, to me, Chad, that's a great tie together that the young people and even the not so young people, Mark, can consume.
So one of the questions I think that needs to be asked is, why should people care about buildings? Right, especially those sort of people that are not in buildings, and a lot are young, but obviously, you know, I totally agree that we're not just after the millennials. But why should anybody care about something that we haven't cared about ever in our lives?
Okay, well, SES Consulting, they basically point all of their successes in carbon that hasn't been thrown in the air. Basically, the buildings, they don't say how much energy they save. They say how many tons of carbon they prevented from being thrown in the air. And that's basically whatever the goal everybody is working towards, is how much carbon did we not throw in the air today. So that's just a different way of looking at it. And I think it helps motivate the folks.
Yeah, I mean, Anto, why did we care about car exhaust when nobody cared about it for a while? Why do we care about, nuclear when nobody cared about it? It's just, maybe it's just time to care about it.
It needs, I say, Bill, that's a good point. Why do we care about plastic straws or water, plastic water bottles? We need a cause here or something, a champion of some kind.
Yeah,
To
it's
draw
just time to care.
And that I think ties with the motivation, especially of millennials. Again, that's not the only focus, but if you look at all of the writings about what millennials and what the next generation care about, it's kind of purpose, it's kind of mission. It's not just stuff that we used to care about, and sort of things like sustainability and energy and climate are sort of things. So maybe that's one way of structuring something. I think what you're speaking about, Steve, is kind of the organizing all of this and delivering it. But what is the message? Unless there's a core message that aligns with what people care about.
I think we're going to have a generation coming up here that is going to have safe buildings on their mind. Just like, we had a generation after 9/11 that always had that in the back. There's a certain window of age group that they'll carry that with them very meaningfully for the rest of their lives, right? So maybe there's something there. It comes back to, we've talked about this a number of times. How do we make buildings safe from coronavirus kind of a thing? So I don't
maybe
know.
that changes the attitude as you walk into a building is no longer transparent. What we were talking about earlier, it's kind of, you would look at something and say, am I going to be okay in there? That's
right. It's a safe zone or not a safe zone, right? And especially, if this thing continues to mutate, on and on, which there's no reason to believe it won't, it's going to be a little like the flu, forever with us, with new vaccines every year. But a lot of the practices and the thinking that we've adopted in the last year plus is going to be with us forever now, right? So there might be something there, I don't know.
Sorry, I was going to say, so let me ask a question. Is this just related to our industry, or is it engineering? I'm sure you all had the same problem as I did when my kids were young. They used to say, yeah, but what do you do? And then eventually get round to being, oh, you're an engineer. You're not a lawyer. You're not an accountant. You're an engineer. So you already you can do anything from, working on a power station to fitting electric light bulbs, but you're an engineer then. And that already sectionalizes you. And I don't know whether all the other industries in engineering have the same issue, because it's kind of labeled that way. I mean, is industrial engineering, is mechanical engineering, civil engineering, are they all struggling to get people in there? And I would probably guess yes.
Yes.
Industrial was in one of the jobs that was in the 30 list that I was looking at.
Right.
There is a little bit there, and engineers certainly comes up several times.
Yep.
We need something like we create remote control buildings.
Right.
Just
Different
remote
words.
control cars. We have remote control buildings.
Yep.
Autonomous.
Yeah. Autonomous
Don't
buildings.
do that,
Right.
buddy. Change in the context.
Yeah.
So can something sort of sprout out of we're automating homes now? Is that not something that can grow up into commercial buildings that it becomes more attractive?
We'll call it building automation.
Hey, that's an idea, Bill.
Oh, no, automated buildings.
No, I was thinking that earlier. Rob, that's a good point. Everyone's, kids are getting very comfortable and familiar with, automating their homes now, right? Nest thermostats and doorbell, Ring doorbells or whatever it might be. So I can't imagine that comfort won't carry into commercial buildings at some point in time. It's got to. They would expect, why is a commercial building 20 years behind my house? That doesn't sound right, right?
That's always been, that's an interesting point though, Tracy. That's always been the nature of our business, right? In that, in the early days, before we even had PCs and so forth, for the building operators, the building operators had PCs at home, and they would kind of bring their laptops to work, and then they were slowly adopted. And then when we had iPads and mobiles experiences, they were at the home first before they were in the buildings, and they were adopted into the home, and they were adopted by the building guys bringing their stuff to work.
Yeah.
So is automation then a sort of a trigger word, a positive trigger word?
Actually, I want to tell a war story right now. Way back in the early days of the DDC, one of the things we obviously needed to talk to the DDC system was a personal computer. Laptops hadn't been inventable. We had a few luggables and things like that. But what happened in a lot of projects, we were the first one that got a computer into the mechanical office because they needed it to talk to their DDC system. And I swear that's why some of the first DDC systems were basically spawned. The other thing that came out of that is when the gamers came and started looking at their PCs and stuff. I remember working on one project, and we built some of the first HTML interfaces and PDF interfaces way back when with a gamer. And he just saw the connection between all of this stuff really crystal clear. And so again, I think we're at exactly the same situation. We have a whole group of folks that have these microprocessors, Raspberry Pis, and Beagle boards in their touch and feel. They know how to experiment with them, and they will basically learn our industry through them. And I think the IFT is basically, I think, a gateway into it. I think we just have to get them to take a look at what we're doing. I think the home market is pretty interesting. I find these devices amazing. The fact that they can set themselves up. I've got a new TV. I couldn't believe it. I basically signed on with my phone, and all of the setups, passwords and stuff were on my phone, and then came through to my TV. And within minutes, I had everything I had on my phone on my TV. I hadn't kind of thought that concept through of devices, setting devices up. But in the kids' minds, I mean, how else would you do it? It's so there's this whole leading of what's happening in IFT that keeps falling on us, and we're always kind of chasing it, I think. And we just need to create an interest for them to come and try and apply their knowledge to our industry.
But isn't that actually one of the problems? Building controllers don't set up as easily as Google TV or my Blink camera. That's not how they do. So let's take somebody and disillusion the heck out of them, right? Oh, you've been playing with this stuff. You built a great terrarium, all this stuff. Here, come into a building, and they're going to go, what is this? What is it? What's the matter with these products? This is ridiculous. I'm not going to do it. I'll give you a quick anecdote too. I grew up in New England. I skied my whole life. I moved to California and taught my wife to ski, right? And we skied out in the beautiful powder and all that. And then we moved back to New England. I took her skiing one day, and literally she looked at me and goes, "What is this? I'm going in." Right? Because it's so cold and blue ice. Steve knows what I'm talking. She's like, "What did you bring me here for? This isn't skiing."
This isn't skiing.
This is what is this? But really, building equipment, even the best, doesn't work like these things that have millions or billions of dollars of investment to make them easy for consumers.
Yeah.
And that isn't going to change rapidly, even if manufacturers want to, because the complexity of what you're doing in a building versus the 8 devices I'm putting in my home, they're, the orders of magnitude different.
But that's the hurdle I was talking about earlier, John, that I was excited with my son's project. The hurdle of getting to the point where you're interested in doing something, maintaining a temperature or some environment or whatever else is the hurdle's too large, right, to get someone really excited by that. And it's not because the equipment can't do it. It's just the hurdle of the hardware, the the software, the specific controller or whoever manufacturer's controller that you've got, the software you're required to do the front end, their web software, the data piece. No offense, the SkySpark piece. The hurdle to get to a point where you can show something really interesting and compelling is huge. And a part of the the whole thing that my son was doing was, I thought that was just a fascinating way of getting over the hurdle to show, I get it, I'm creating value and I'm saving energy and I'm creating all this analysis. Now I can see how do I take this and apply that to a bigger space, right? And I think that's part of our challenge is the hurdle to get someone excited about doing that within the building is huge. We just put too much stuff in the way to get in there.
I listened to all this. I get the feeling that the next generation is going to get interested and excited and entrenched in smart buildings, but I don't think it's going to be with the controllers and technologies and tools that we currently have. I feel like all those other tools and things that they're familiar with, that they're developing, this is a lot like what I would call an IoT mindset versus a building automation mindset. It's still controlling and doing the same things in the end, but it's a different mindset. How you connect, what you do, the purpose for connecting is about data and that part of it. I feel like there's a whole generation is going to kind of take over what we do with tools that we don't even know about yet. That it's coming. There's no way for us to avoid it because they're doing it with everything else in their lives. Why wouldn't they do it with this, right? I don't know. I'm just thinking about what would it look like 10 or 20 years from now? Are we still trying to teach people how to use the same controllers from the four big guys, or is it something completely different and new?
So Tracy, if that were to happen, and that's a reasonable sort of hypothesis, and new people come in with new technologies and stuff, and they actually do a better job than we have been doing, that's not a bad scenario, is it?
I agree. And I think what we're going to see is a decoupling. We've worked and worked and worked, most of us on this screen, to integrate, interoperate, communicate. And I think we're going to see a trend that's going to decouple everything. First, think about what's going on in the home. My doorbell doesn't talk to my camera, my other cameras, that doesn't talk to, my other devices that I have around the house. It's all islands of automation that they solve in a really unique and interesting and smart way. And I think that's how it's going to start in commercial buildings. We're going to start to see, small applications that are solved in more of an IoT home automation sort of mindset. And then eventually it will come back around and get integrated again, I bet.
Everything in your home, Tracy, is pretty much wireless. We're at zero state at the moment of wireless in buildings. It just hasn't been adopted anywhere. If you can have things auto configure, surely it's got to be done wirelessly. It can't be, just throwing IP cables around the place or any 485 or whatever connectivity. But we just haven't even started.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And
that
Tracy,
was sorry,
Tracy,
Mark.
I was going to say, I would argue with you on the home front is that the technology exists, but there are so many protocols and there's no standard. So nobody's winning that battle to integrate within the home.
Yeah. And the thing is, and I guess what I'm trying to say, I don't think they care. We care about integration. I don't think people who aren't in it and haven't lived the problems of islands of automation, I don't think they care. They just want to solve their cool problem their own way.
You can make
that's the thing. Sorry, Roger.
Yeah, go ahead. Anna.
I was going to say, but what you're describing, Tracy, I see all the time, in that the IoT guys are coming in, they're solving a unique business problem, right, for the customer. And I give you a really simple example, which I thought was fascinating. Large customer of ours, APAC market, they wanted to know and monitor the toilet, the water in the restrooms, right, the toilets, right? And they wanted to know the difference between people leaving the faucet running, or is the toilet running, or is the urinal running, and all that sort of stuff. And the system that's in there, I think it's a big Johnson system. And they approached Johnson's and they came back with a traditional BMS, we'll put flow sensors on, all the pipes and all this sort of stuff and bring it all back and do this whole analysis. And then they came across this guy who had an IoT solution, and he was using microphones and wireless, and he put a microphone in each of the toilets, and his software, his AI software, could determine the difference in the flow sound between the urinal. Slam dunk, right? Because it solved the business problem. It was easy to deploy. It was like 1/10 the price of the BMS solution. Now that was great and solved the business problem, but then the facility guys were going like, okay, but you know what? This would be really useful to have this data tied into the main water flow so we can do what our real consumption analysis is. How are you going to do that? I don't know, type of thing. But that's how they get in there. They solve specific business problems.
That's how they've grown up with immediate gratification, right?
Yes.
I want to solve today's problem right now.
Right.
I don't care about the big picture. I just need to solve today's picture. So I think there's a tendency to be more accepting of that kind of a solution than what we would think as a really elegant solution, right? Integrated and all of the things that we normally picture and put into our systems. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm right. It just seems like I can see, or it's almost like a feeling, every once in a while, I'll bump into something that's going on in a building or with a customer that will be kind of like this, but I'm starting to see that more and more often now. And
Tracy, did you have some scorn when you were saying that? Were you looking down on these IoT guys? Not looking down, wrong word, but disappointed in how they're getting in there?
No, because I've spent the last 5 or 7 years going more from an IoT perspective, and that's how we've done it. In the solutions that we've used and some of the retail stuff that we've done, there isn't hardly a single brand of anything that you'd recognize in there. None of the traditional controllers or any of that kind of stuff. All IoT sort of things. And I just thought that was, I don't think that was clever or anything like that. I was paying attention to knocking off little problems here and there, and the team I was working with, that's the way that they thought, and it all kind of came together that way. So maybe I'm biased because of that experience, but it just seems logical. If you look at how things tend to trend and ebb and flow, centralized, decentralized, now back to centralized, standalone or not standalone. And I don't know, there's some trends going on here that make me feel like that's the way this might go.
In the big enterprise systems that we see, all of these things are forbidden. Basically, they're not allowed to bring in or connect any of these devices, military, higher education, healthcare. So I would see, I would see that adoption in the market for smaller buildings and distributed things. I don't see it at all in the larger stuff because of security constraints.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I don't think it will be a solution for everything, but I think that's where we'll see a lot of the innovation happening, right? Safe does not promote innovation. Secure does not promote innovation, unless it's to improve secure or safe, right? So there's no motivation to innovate on those sides and those kinds of applications. Everywhere else, though, I think is fair game.
Right.
Yep.
So we talked a lot about quite a number of things. So how can we corral these thoughts or these sort of opportunities or these things? What can we do? Because the whole purpose of having this conversation is trying to make change happen. What are the?
I kind of feel like we're chipping away at little pieces of it each week or each month with a different topic, right? Mm-hmm. We've talked about different parts of integration. We talked about IoT and AI and all of these, the change in the world that might instigate some of this change in thinking. And now we're talking about mentorship and how do we get people in? Well, all of these are kind of pieces of that puzzle, I think, to bring it. You know, when you first said that, the first thing that popped into my mind is we need to draw parallels like Anna was talking about with the vivarium that, you know, that's like a building. You just designed a building control system. It's just at this scale instead of that scale. So I think it's going to happen that way, but it's an education, it comes back to the education thing. I think Ken talked about a lot.
So I think it also falls into two camps. There is the millennials or the younger guys that are maybe even we're talking about getting educated and coming on into the industry. Then there's a shorter term opportunity, which is Mark's guys of transferring across and picking up much quicker. So I think there's, you know, it depends. Obviously, you've got to run both in parallel. But if you want to see a quicker response, surely it's got to be people who have an opportunity now that perhaps they are without work to be able to actually change across to the industry, and that would bring people in much quicker. I'm not suggesting you have to, you know, you shouldn't be doing the longer term stuff, which is educating kids at schools and universities and beyond. But you know, the people transferring across from different industries is going to give us a quicker response.
How did the auto industry do it when they went through their troubles years and years ago? And there were lots of folks who were, you know, their jobs were lost. And what industries did they go into, and how did they do it?
Well, if you believe the hype, they were retrained as robot engineers, right? Which I don't believe, but
I think it's a new set of resources that came in and replaced the old ones. But it's interesting. I talked with a guy who works with Volkswagen not long ago. He's one of the soccer dads, and he was talking about that problem. And they're having a similar problem, which is, you know, cars are, you know, you don't climb up into the hood and you know, adjust your timing or change your points or do any of that kind of stuff that we did when we were young anymore. They're looking for guys and gals who are computer engineers, right? So, and it's a problem, and it's in how you do it. I mean, even if you think of some of the companies out there now, you know, Tesla runs diagnostics while you're on the phone with them, setting up your appointment, and they understand what's going on. That's going to be more common with all of the brands here in no time. I think some of it already exists, actually. So
I think we've been pulling that around a little bit. The autonomous building, I think, has to follow the autonomous car, and just some of the stuff that's going on there. If anybody's just bought a car in the last few years, just the amount of sensors, the amount of radar sensors, camera sensors and stuff, and it's all integrated. And it's not integrated. I kind of, because back in the old days, it used to be on what they used to call the CAN network, which was that car automation network. I think that's what it stood for. And so again, there was a hard standard, but I think that hard standard is more or less disappeared, and the whole car has become wireless. And you got your tire pressure sensors whipping around. You've got radar on every point in your car. And this stuff is obviously cost effective. So we need to see these new kinds of sensors coming in to our building. Actually, Rick Rolston just posted a thing that his building, he now has to wave his hand to get into the building because he's not allowed to touch the door handles because of COVID. So, you know, so let me into the building. So again, an autonomous interface. And we've been kind of ignoring that. And I think there's going to be a social network that's going to get laid on top of some of this BACnet stuff that needs to be there. I don't want to have that kind of controlling a $500,000 chiller, but I'm okay with it opening and closing the door and keeping track, and also maybe making sure that my social distance is correct. So I think we are going to see. I loved your thing that we're either always moving towards centralization or away from it. And I think maybe together apart is all about that as well. We are in fact moving apart. The other thing is silos there's a couple of things. In our days, networks were very problematic and they had to be controlled or they just turned into a disaster. With these new wireless networks, somehow they seem to be able to crash themselves, rebuild themselves, and be back up doing something they never did before very quickly. And so,
Oh, have you been on the Tossie Box website?
sorry?
Wow.
So Ken, you seem to be suggesting that technology changes or infrastructure kind of changes is going to sort of change the dynamics, which may be true. I mean, in a way, what you were talking about, Anno, is a technology thing that occurred.
Well, the technology change spurs the interest, right?
Right. That's what I mean. It's the enabler of.
Well, go back to Ken's concept of an autonomous building. If I were to ask all you guys, how would you define an autonomous building? I bet 80 or 90% of what we'd all say would be very similar to one another, right? It's all the stuff that we've been working towards in terms of sustainability and remote control and data and lots of sensors and everything networked, and, you know, a building that's off grid and self-sustaining and is safe to go inside. It's, you know, takes care of all of that. What, do you guys agree with that? There is a concept there.
Yeah, I think it's a really good concept, actually.
Well, except I think that's the way you guys think. I
Yeah.
think if you threw that out to anybody outside of our industry, they wouldn't even have touched on any one of those topics. They would have said, how does this building interact when I walk into it? How is the building autonomous to my action? Because that's what the car is. They get into the car and the car does all of these things because they're in the car. It connects their phone, you know, all of that's just a whole bunch of stuff going on.
And what you said, Ken, I think you just hit on it. It's how does it interact and action with me?
Yeah,
That's
the user
right.
experience.
Me, not
Yeah.
anybody else, just
Yeah.
me.
The new controlled measurable is me.
Right.
There you go.
We're one really, really large scale electrical grid failure from, you know, think pandemic size electrical grid failure from everybody wanting to be off the grid and having homes that have generators and solar and batteries and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think we're headed that way, one way or another anyway, towards that autonomous sort of a building. There's a lot of movement in that area in the residential space already.
I like
So those changes, which are trends really, which we're seeing, is our conclusion that those are going to be the enabler of how we view smart buildings? Is that
The fact we don't allow wireless in our buildings is problematic because the kids only know wireless.
Mhm.
They can't understand. They have no idea how to undo a light bulb or to plug in a cord or anything like that. They basically know what an IP address is, and that's how they work it. That's how they come at everything. And I agree with them after watching what they're doing and just seeing how some of that stuff comes together effortlessly. I'm impressed. So the very fact that we've created this giant roadblock in front of our building saying, don't bring any of that wireless crap in here. This is a BACnet lawn haystack, you know, whatever. So we kind of created our own little environment. I think we have to start softening some of those decisions and start taking a look at some of this equipment and how it's going to come in. And when it comes in, the young people will come with it.
You know, I've seen that already just in the last 10 years on the retail side. When we started and we were working with McDonald's, they did not want any of their locations connected. They had to be standalone on-premise user interface, no connection. We don't care about that. And now every single one of them has that. In fact, they have a dedicated port in their IT infrastructure where we plug into at this point. I mean, that's in a less than a 10-year span. Right now, everything's connected. They're looking at everything. So, and we have a bunch of wireless stuff that we're deploying in there too. So,
What kind of wireless, Tracy? Is it traditional IP wireless, or is it?
no, it's primarily what we've been using is Zigbee, and there's not really a technical reason for that. That was a business reason driven by availability of product and price of that. So. We see a lot of other companies who are a little bit more intentional about it, who are using various versions of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi out there, though. More consumer driven or originated standards, wireless standards.
I think that's the other thing we got to look at is take a look at car sensors for autonomous cars. They're just amazingly powerful and amazingly cheap. And the problem we've always had as an industry is we never have the volume. We've never been able to offer somebody the opportunity to sell 1 million of these things. But if we take sensors that are actually used on cars, they've got maybe tens of millions of them produced, and all of a sudden a very sophisticated sensor camera or something turns into a $2 or $3 chip. And so we need to chase that industry and overlay it.
Yeah,
on our smart
consumer
buildings.
electronics in general. When you say, Ken, like anything that's used in a cell phone or an iPad, a chip or a Wi-Fi chip or a memory chip, or yeah, that is a fantastic idea. Great approach to that. And cars get looking more like an environment to us, right? Than a cell phone is.
So what was, and I've looked at it, what was all the cool new technology that was just shown last week before at CES?
Oh yeah, did anyone go or anyone hear anything?
So bring that in. You talked about you're talking about the technology, wireless, whatever applications. I saw several things that could be applied to our industry for sure.
Yep. I agree. Anything that we can adopt from that has consumer volume, but can be applied with an industrial or commercial grade level of quality or security or whatever is going to be a huge win for our industry like that.
That sounds interesting, although the sort of the alignment of how long things last and
yeah, and we had that problem. We started, our user interfaces were built on Samsung tablets,
right.
and they changed that form factor and everything every 18 months. So we were redesigning, the wall mount and everything. Yeah, it was a pain. That is a problem. And there's still challenges for sure.
Actually, that's a good point, though, is our industry here, most of the controllers are almost as old as the folks on the screens here.
Yeah.
And the stuff in our house is, like the next model is only a year old or only a few months old, and it does something significant, and I'm happy to throw away my wireless such and such for a new wireless something else, or my phone. The phone has sort of a life of about 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And it's our lifeline. We need to get that mentality into our devices and the ability to change them or to freeze them at a particular capability and interface.
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. Anybody have a revealing thought that they want to share with everybody that they've learned or something big? I did have one thing. I was looking at Roger's slide on the two hype cycles that came from Nicholas, and I observed that in 2019, smart buildings was more than 10 years away from being mature, and it's on the left side of the hype curve. And 18 months later, smart buildings is only 2 years away. I mean, we missed the peak hype altogether. So somehow we've progressed 5 years in the last 18 months. So I think we should congratulate ourselves.
That's pandemic driven, and
Pandemic
everything goes at warp speed now, right? So
Let's just hope we're not post building pretty soon.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, we'll wrap this this week's show. Thank you very much, everybody, for a great contribution, great conversation. We will continue next week, one more week on the workforce theme, and then we'll move on to another subject for February. That's TBD. But with that, thank you, everybody. Thanks, the attendees, and video will be up tomorrow morning, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, a lot of great chat. That's good stuff. We'll talk to you
Next
next
week on Autonomous Building TV.
yeah, autonomous building TV. There we go.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.